So, hello and welcome. Millie, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. I've been reading your book, so I'm really fascinated into where we can take this conversation because I feel like there's a lot of areas within kind of what you wrote about in the book. So I'm excited to see where we dive into.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. We could just go off on many different tangents.
Oh, do you know what? I really hope we do. To be honest, I really hope we do because I find and I don't know if it's the same with you, but when you do your get-togethers and stuff through the Sober Girl Society, but sometimes you can have a plan, right? Like I can write as many notes and I can research as much as possible and come up with all these amazing topics and questions that I want to ask for. But the second you get in front of someone and you start just having that time together and having a conversation, it all goes out the window because it all just flows a bit more naturally. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Do you know what? Even writing as well, when I was writing the book, I had a very structured plan of what I was going to write about. And then I started researching stuff and I'd write something and I'd be like, oh, well, actually, that feeds into that. And it didn't really end up how I had initially thought it would. So, yeah, I think it's exactly the same process.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing because, like you're saying, that writing process is very similar. And it's like when I write, I sit down and I take an idea. So I'll take an idea of spending time alone, right? I'll just have that in my head. And then I'll sit and I'll just write about, okay, so here's something that I've learned about spending time alone. And then I'll just fill the rest of the page or 2 pages and then go back to it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't expect half of that stuff to come out, but it actually looks and sounds quite good. Was it a similar kind of process for you then?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd really written structured chapters and this is how I wanted to go and these are the topics I want to cover, and then I'd write a paragraph and then something would come to my brain and be like, oh yeah, and that. And it was, I think as well, because I hadn't really looked back on all my sort of drinking career, as you'd call it. So when I really did look back and really analyse, okay, when did this start? When was this changeover? I think because I'd kind of pushed it down for a long time of oh, that was really embarrassing part of my life. And then when I started to think about it and things started to come up, I was like, oh yeah, and then that, and oh, okay, that's why I did that. So yeah, I just went off on many different tangents. But I mean, I'm quite butterfly minded anyway. I always say I'd start one thing and then I'm doing something else. I can't sit still for 10 minutes. So the fact that I'm going to sit still for the next hour or so is going to be a miracle.
I'll take that as a compliment then. That's awesome to hear. Do you know what, it's so funny. I'm so similar. I can either really focus on something like this type of conversation. I can really sit down and focus on it. I can really sit down and focus on a bit of writing. But you ask me to read or to do some sort of research on something or anything else, and my mind just goes to all these different places and I get so distracted with so many different things, and I'm like, no, wait, I need to come back to this. Is the task. Let's just put the timer aside. And one of the things I've started doing recently is I've started to write the next book that I want to put out, and I've struggled to get into the writing process this time. So what I've been doing is a couple of days a week is I just sit on my laptop before I've checked an email, before I've checked my WhatsApp, my my Instagram, my TikTok and everything else. And I say, shout to my phone, put a timer on for 60 minutes. And I just sit with a blank page and I just write and see, if I can write 2 chapters, 3 chapters, 4 chapters, whatever it is. And that's actually been really useful, just knowing that that timer will go off at some point and I've just got to focus on this right now.
Yeah, I think that I work exactly the same way. If I don't have a deadline or a structure or a set amount of time, then I will just go off and do different things. So yeah, I always set timers when I have to do work. And as soon as I've got a deadline, as soon as it's an external deadline that someone else has set, I know I'll get it done. But if it's in a thing that I've just decided that I want to do that's got kind of an infinite deadline, it's just when I do it, then I really have to set those. Okay, I'm going to do 60 minutes a day, I'm going to do this. Otherwise, I just don't do it.
Yeah. It's funny actually because even just thinking about it now, right, it feels like that's so applicable to every other area of life. And reading your story, and it's there's so many parts in the book where you talk about saying this is the last time I'm drinking, I'm never drinking again. It's you're almost setting yourself a deadline in a way of that's it, that's the last ever time, but then you'd go over it and you'd go out on the weekend and you drink again. What was the thing that kind of then tipped you over the edge in a way in terms of wanting to actually go, no, this is it, this is the last time I'm going to drink?
Yeah, I think this is the interesting thing, actually, exactly what you say about a deadline. And this is why, like, so many of us don't stop drinking until we hit that, like, rock bottom, because that is like the deadline, really. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to keep going until, this is the point where I have to. And it's weird because when I look back, I'm like, I actually am very surprised still that I made that decision and stuck to it, because there wasn't like a rock bottom moment for me. It was just another hangover. And like my weekends were getting a bit like Groundhog Day, really. It was, drink on a Friday and Saturday, spend my entire weekend hungover. Monday feel a bit better again, Tuesday feel normal, Wednesday be like, I know what I want to do at the weekend. I want to go out and get hammered. So it was like this real cycle. So interrupting that was the hardest thing. I mean, one thing for me, I read this book called The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, and I had this like almighty mind like set shift around alcohol, and that I would say is the catalyst. And I always say a book changed my life, and I genuinely think it did, because that day it's not I read that book and then that was it, I just stopped drinking, but that mindset shift made me see like sobriety and not drinking in a completely different way. And then there was a lot more work after that, but I do pinpoint that as like one of the turning points was reading that book on a hangover, and because I just never ever thought about it in the way that this book talked about it before.
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm astonished that you managed to read on a hangover, because I know that'd be the last thing on my list, like trying to focus my brain on words on a page.
Well, it was an audiobook for exactly
right.
that reason, and because I'm like you, I actually do find it quite difficult to read unless I like really, really want to read a book. So I'm quite a big audiobook fan as well.
Oh, so you see, I've only just got into them recently, because I listen to loads of podcasts, and it's like I've missed that time of having something in my ears that I feel like I'm learning from. And it's like when I'm having to, especially in a short space of time, like read a book for a podcast guest like yourself, it's like it's easier for me to just digest it audibly, because I'm an audible like learner. Like I take more in when I listen than when I read, even though I enjoy sitting down and reading. So I'm interested in what was it then about that, listening to that book, that caused that shift? Like, what was the moment, what was the thing that you just thought, wow, this makes so much sense for me?
I think it was that like idea of you don't have to wait until the deadline has expired of like not drinking. You don't have to wait until you're that bad. You don't have to wait until like drinking has taken everything from you. If it is a visible problem in your life, which it was for me, you can actually just stop. And it kind of talked about, I mean, it was called The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. So it talked about the joy of it. And in my life, sobriety had always been like, boring, a restriction. And it actually made me see it as quite freeing. And actually, if I take this off the table, look at all these other things that I might gain. Like I might have more money, I'll have more time, I'll have better energy, my anxiety will be decreased. Like it really focused on the good side and not this like giving up. Like that's what we say. We say you're giving up alcohol. We never think actually you're gaining productivity, like you're gaining clarity, you're gaining all these things. And that was what it kind of showed me. And I'd never ever thought about it like that before. I was like, oh god, everyone who is sober is boring. They had a problem, they had this, they had that. And I think just looking at it from a different way was just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and I love that comparison you made of like, when you look at people who are sober, you think, oh, they must have had a problem. Like, and we assume so much of, be it sobriety with drink or alcohol, or we assume, sorry, not alcohol, drugs, we assume it to be, oh, you had a problem so you had to give up, right? That rock bottom moment that you mentioned before. And what I find fascinating is that we make that comparison, but then when I hear your story and some of the people who you talk about in the book, and no doubt some of the people who are part of the society as a whole, it's like actually you're just casual every weekend drinkers. You're not alcoholics in inverted commas, but there is a problem with the way that your life unfolds after a weekend of drinking. So what was your life like around that time when or in that lead up really to that decision? Like what were the sort of things that were happening on your weekends when you were hungover, when you were drinking, that kind of made you reflect on this idea of like, actually maybe this isn't such a good thing after all?
Yeah, so I was actually I would say a latecomer to drinking in British terms. I didn't really do the like 14 White Lightning cider at a park that all my friends did when I was younger. I'd only been drunk before I was 18, probably like once or twice, and then I would probably even say like tipsy, you know, like a few Bacardi breezers at a family party. And then I am an August birthday, so I'm like the youngest in the year. So I turned 18, and then literally 3 weeks later I went to university. And I went to Sussex in Brighton, and like where I'd come from was like quite a small town, you know, like 1 or 2 bars, everyone knows everyone. And I got thrust into this like Brighton seafront nightlife culture where there was like, you know, clubs lining the beach. And I started working in like nightclub promoting. I worked in a shop bar. I had like 3 different student jobs that I like worked every week. And I went from a person who just didn't drink hardly ever to literally binge drinking 3-4 nights a week. So I always say, like, I never really learned how to drink sensibly. And when I went to uni, it was kind of around the time when like Geordie Shore had just started. So it was like in its prime. And that is how I modelled my drinking was, you know, we go out, we get as drunk as we possibly can, and we don't come home until like someone has thrown up and been put in an Uber. And I carried on like that for the whole 3 years of uni. It is a miracle I ended up with a 2-1. I genuinely don't know how that happened.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks. Left uni, and then I went to work in PR and then in journalism, and both of those are quite, you know, they're media industries. It was fashion, it was notoriously boozy, so we would work like fashion launches, and then we would go to the like bar and drink copious amounts of wine. I was living in Kent at the time, so I was commuting home from London to Kent and ending up in like Dover because I would just go and fall asleep on the train, and then I'd have to get £150 taxi back home because this was like before Uber as well.
Yeah.
And it just gradually kind of got a little bit worse, and then I was going out and blacking out quite a lot. So I was drinking really quickly. I'm quite a small human being, and I was doing a lot of shots, and that was causing me to black out. So I would not remember like quite large portions of my night, sometimes good like 4 or 5 hours. And then I started putting myself in a few more like dangerous situations. So I wouldn't remember how I'd got home. So I would wake up the next day and be like, I genuinely have no recollection of how I got home. And I wouldn't remember like what I'd said, what I'd done. And, you know, it's those things that we laugh about now of like, oh, I can't remember if I spoke to so-and-so, did I accidentally call them a dickhead? Like I couldn't remember bits. But then it really started to affect my mental health. So I would be really, really anxious on the weekend. So I would get beer fear, but it would be like magnified by like 100. So I would just feel awful the whole weekend. I would, my hangovers were horrendous. So I would just stay in bed. I would be sick. I would be like anxious and nervous. And then, you know, I would start to feel better by like Monday, Tuesday. And then it got to Thursday and I was like a goldfish and I would just do it all again. And I was just in this cycle really of just drinking. But it kind of, without me even realising it, became something that I felt more like I needed. And because when I had first started drinking, I just did it because everyone else was, and because I was a student and that's what you're told to do. You know, Freshers Week was a pub crawl and everything like that. But slowly it started to become something that I relied on. So I needed it for confidence. If I went on a date, I felt like I couldn't go on a date without drinking. And it just slowly became something that I used when I was insecure, when I was unhappy, when I was stressed. And that kind of transformed before my eyes. And I think reading the book, I think another thing as well that I realised is that Catherine Gray, who was the writer, she was a few years older than me. And I read her story and I was like, my drinking is exactly like that. But hers was just like that added layer on top. And I was like, if I keep drinking, that's what my drinking is going to look like. So, I mean, in my book, I reference her as the ghost of Christmas future, because it was almost like someone was saying that this is going to be you. Yeah. And like she talks about how she got arrested on a night out and ended up in Brixton police station because she told a police officer to F off. And I thought, I've done so many stupid things on a night out that I would never do if I was sober. So I read that book in February 2018 and was like, I think I'm gonna stop drinking because it is just really impacting my life. I'm miserable all the time, I'm anxious all the time, I'm actually starting to rely on it a little bit more than I want to. And 3 years later, here we are. So that's the kind of story in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I think it's such a fascinating culture, isn't it? The uni culture, because I didn't go to uni. Like I'm actually I look back now and I'm like, I was very wise, a lot more than I gave myself credit for at the time. But like, I decided not to go to uni because I didn't want to get caught up in that drinking culture, and I knew that the type of person that I was at the time, I was very much. I mean, I didn't know it then, but I was depressed, right? I was feeling very depressed in my life, and I would find things to as escapism, right? So things like drinking. I started to realize later on that when I was feeling at my worst was when I'd just want to go out and get battered on the weekend, or just go out and have, just to take my mind off it. And looking back now, when I made the decision about not going to uni, it was pretty much about like, I don't want to go to uni because I know the type of person I am, and I know that if I go, I'm not going to do much of the work because I never did a lot of schoolwork anyway, so let alone write 20,000 word essays and all that sort of nonsense. But I also knew that I'd probably end up just smoking lots of weed, drinking a lot, and playing a lot of PlayStation. I was like, that's not a very good use of the money that I'm going to be investing and time I'm investing in a uni experience. So let me just not do it.
So they're very wise. That was a very wise decision.
Right? I like that. Like I look at it now and I'm like, that was such a wise choice. Like, because the easy option would be, let's just go have 4 years at uni and have like a bit of a laugh. But that being said, I did spend a lot of time and weekends visiting friends at uni, and it's like I was always very surprised by the culture of like, it's such a heavy drinking culture, isn't it? And it's like, I don't know what it is about that environment that breeds that culture. But I don't know, it's fascinating. I don't know what your kind of thoughts are on, why that culture exists around universities.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I would say is I do think it's changing now. I mean, the stats are showing that young people are drinking less. And last year, I actually went to Bournemouth Uni to run some pop-up alcohol-free bars in their halls of residence. Oh. And I was shocked by the reaction. One guy actually came over to me and was like, oh, are these alcohol-free? And I got really defensive. I was like, yeah, and what? And he was like, oh, no, that's great because I don't drink. And I was like, oh, God, I feel really bad now. Like, I thought he was going to have a go at me. And so I would say, first of all, that's changing. But when I was at uni, I don't know. I think maybe it's just been a whole thing. It's like all of a sudden you get these adults and like, well, I wasn't even an adult. I'd only just stopped being 17. And all of a sudden I was living with all these people. And I mean, the first few weeks as well, because you don't know anyone, you're meeting all these new people, you're completely on your own. I just drank because they were and because I wanted to fit in and I wanted them to like me because I didn't have my existing friends around me. So I think, it is such a liquid courage thing. So I think that's like the first thing is meeting new people. I think, being teeny tiny adults all living together that actually don't understand the world yet. But I mean, it was kind of even enforced by the uni, which I thought was like quite strange. You were kind of almost like encouraged, really. They like one of the organised activities was like a Freshers Week bar crawl, and you got like drinks tokens. And I remember Jägermeister sponsored loads of stuff at the Freshers Fair. So it was kind of, I've still got like, I'm really weird in that I like keep everything, like all memories and stuff. I've still got like a flashing Jägermeister badge that I got my Freshers Fair. So I think, it's just so ingrained, but I do think it is changing as the good thing.
That's good. And I think it's like one of those things where I think it's just that there's like a, obviously platforms like yours, but there's just a general rising of consciousness with people. And I think we're beginning to question a lot more in terms of like, why are we going out on these ridiculous drinking and binge drinking sprees? Why am I spending so much money on this one thing that inevitably makes me feel horrible for like the next day or 2 days? And it's certainly as you get older, that's 2-day hangovers. And it's like, I think people are starting to question that more. And as people are kind of going on this journey, they're finding interest in different things and other ways to engage with people rather than just, being that drunk, funny person who can make friends with everyone. It's actually, I can make friends with people being me. And what I really took from your book is there's a real strong theme within it of like this journey of self-love. As you kind of, started your journey with sobriety, you kind of went on this journey of actually, this is opening up a whole new world to me to understand more about myself. Was that like an intentional thing when you were writing that you wanted to get across, or is that just something that is reflected through the journey naturally?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I wanted to get across, because I think, I mean, it sounds so cliche when you say, you know, like I went on this like self-exploration journey, but I was just so surprised that it wasn't just taking alcohol out of the equation. It was actually like learning who I was, because everything, I was party girl, that was my identity, you know, like everyone just bought me gin for my birthday, and every meme I got tagged in was like the drunk one, blah blah, like all those videos that you see on Facebook, I was always getting tagged in them, and that was my identity. I was the one who decided what clubs we went to and got everyone like drinking their shots quicker. And so that when I stopped drinking, I was like, I just don't even know who I am. And so it became this like whole journey of like understanding me, understanding maybe I wasn't this like extrovert, loudmouth party girl. Maybe I was quite quiet and sensitive and did care what people think, because I think when you're like, my persona certainly when I was drinking was, you know, I don't care what people think, I'm going to get as drunk and be as loud, and it was, you know, following that kind of Geordie Shore mentality, when really inside I really cared what people thought of me, and I was really insecure, and when I took away my kind of like blanket of alcohol courage, it was like, well, now I need to learn to be confident on my own, and how am I going to deal with these insecurities if I can't just neck back Jaeger bombs and forget about them? Like, that was what it was. And I think people think, oh, you stopped drinking, but it's not just about, oh, you don't drink anymore. It's like, okay, well, what are you outside of drinking, and how do you relax, and how do you have confidence, and all those things. So I hate and love the word journey, because I think it sounds really like, oh, I went on this magical journey, but it has been a journey. Like, the last 3 years I've like just changed completely as a person. I always say, like, me 3 years ago probably would have hated me now. She would have been like, oh God, shut up and let me just do my shots.
Yeah, I think the journey thing's interesting, right? Because I feel like what I get from what you're saying is like you get to this point where you're like, okay, I'm going to go on this sober journey, I'm going to stop drinking, and all of a sudden you're faced with like, whoa, I've lost like my whole identity. And I can imagine that's quite like destabilizing, right? And it's like I've you know done a lot of things in my life where I've been committed to them, and not necessarily like things like drinking, but just like jobs and like hobbies and things like that. And then when you decide, actually, I don't want to do this job anymore, I don't want to work on this project, or I want to stop this hobby and take up something new, you're like, whoa, hold on, I've just lost like a whole chunk of myself. Like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know, you know, how I'm going to react to this. Like, how like destabilizing was it for you in those like initial days, weeks, months?
Yeah, it completely destabilizing, because you take that out, and the problem is with alcohol in particular is it pretty much permeates like every part of life, and especially when you're British, you know, from the minute you're kind of like wetting the baby's head to, you know, someone dies and you're toasting to them, like alcohol is everywhere. So when you take that out, every single part of your life is then impacted. So like, I was single when I stopped drinking, so I was like, well, now I'm going to have to date, and you know, I've got hen dos, what am I going to do for them? And I've got weddings, what am I going to do for them? It's not just like a hobby, because it's so everywhere. So it changes every single part of your life pretty much, apart from you like just waking up in the morning. It's everywhere. So that is destabilizing, because you're basically like a newborn baby again, who has to learn how to socialize without drinking, how to have confidence without drinking, how to go over and approach people without drinking. Like, you have to relearn everything basically, like how to have fun without drinking, how to unwind without drinking. It impacts so many parts of your life, so it is completely destabilizing. At least it was for someone like me who relied on it in so many of those situations.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that like one of the big impacts it had on your life was with relationships, like with friends, family. I know you said you were single at the time, but dating, you know, what was the kind of effect on those before? Like, how were those relationships, and then what shifted and what's changed, you know, now?
Yeah, I mean, I always say I'm lucky I still have friends after like some of the drunken things that I used to do. Like, I just remember one birthday, my friends had gone to so much trouble to organise this like amazing night out and surprise, and then it was about 2 p.m. and like I always wanted to stay till the very end of everything. I always wanted to be like the last one in the club. They all decided they wanted McDonald's at 2 a.m. and I told them all that I hated them. It was the worst birthday ever. They were terrible friends, just because they wanted to leave, and we'd been out at this point for like 8 hours. So like, I'm not surprised. And I just, you know, threw a complete hysterical fit and said, you know, they were the worst friends ever. And I mean, that's a very tame story, some of the things that they've had to put up with. So I was like a really crappy friend. And then it's really ironic because when I stopped drinking, I was like, oh, no one would like me if I don't drink. No, everyone will think I'm boring. And really, it was actually the complete opposite, because I suddenly became a very decent friend. Like, they didn't have to carry me out of club toilets. They didn't have to, like, pretend to Uber drivers that I wasn't being sick. I didn't, like, cancel on plans the next day. I just became a better friend, and I became a better daughter as well. Like, my mum was always worried. Every time I go out, she'd be like, please don't drink that much. Please be safe. Like, call me at 3 a.m. Make sure I'm still alive. And again, like, I'm just a better daughter. I'd show up more. I'm present. But I really worried, ironically, that those relationships would be so affected by me not drinking, because I was like, people aren't going to like me. I'm not going to be fun. They're going to judge me and all those things. But in fact, it's only improved my relationships tremendously.
Yeah, which is amazing to hear. Like, and I'm interested, were there things that you had to do to kind of like recultivate those relationships? Because like you said, you were starting as like a newborn baby, right? So I'm assuming your relationships, all of a sudden you're not wanting as much to go out with your friends and party and drink, because you've decided to give it up. And, you know, going to restaurants when everyone's getting bottles of wine and this, like, you know, how did you kind of navigate that?
I think in a way I was quite lucky as well, that the age, so I stopped drinking when I was 26, and that was the kind of point that I think some of my friends had started to like calm down a little bit. So I think had I given up drinking at like 22, 23, it would have been a lot harder. So I do really sympathise with anyone trying to give up if they're a little bit younger. But my friends had kind of got to that point where, you know, we weren't going to Fabric until 6 a.m. anymore. It was kind of more, we'd go for brunch and people would get a bit outrageous, and then that would be it. So there was definitely some adapting, but I made a real effort when I first stopped drinking to kind of like suggest other fun things that we could do. And of course, everyone else, like when I first started saying things, would be like, oh no, can't we just go to a bar? Do we have to do that? And I'd be like, no, we're going to do it. And, you know, they are some of the memories that my friends talk about the most, of like, oh, do you remember that time we went whitewater rafting? Or do you remember that time we went axe throwing? It's all those fun things now that they remember. But I had to make a real effort to be like, okay, let's try and do something different, and just, you know, kept checking in on them and be like, do you want to go for breakfast? And making a real effort to do things that didn't revolve around drinking. So that was one thing I had to do. But as I said, I think I was quite lucky, because I actually realised that I was the one who was making everyone go out and down their shots quicker when really they didn't want to. So that's one thing that I did realise, is that I was the ringleader.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was picking up the hints of that as well, because you said before that you were the one who was doing that and rounding people up at uni, and you were like the party girl and getting people to down their shots and stuff like that. And then, you know, when you've started this new life with sobriety, it's like you've all of a sudden kept that role of the ringleader, but you're now doing different things with your friends. And it's like, I talk a lot about the difference between like being and doing, and it's like we focus so much on the doing, which, you know, for you would have been like going out drinking, you know, rounding up your friends, having a good time, you know, drinking shots and all that sort of stuff. But the being around that was very different to the being when you're rounding your friends up to go and do something which doesn't involve drinking, which is a bit more fun, a bit more adventurous, actually probably has you sitting down and having proper conversations, and not just like, oh, talking about, you know, this person you just met in the toilet, or do you know what I mean, like all the sort of
drunk friends.
Yeah, exactly, drunk friends, and you know, all this sort of stuff. You're actually having a meaningful conversation with your friends. So did your relationships with your friends improve from a sense of like you all got to kind of know each other better, because you weren't just solely basing your friendship on going out and getting drunk and everything like that?
Yeah, 100%. I think the friendships have only got like deeper and strengthened, because I think, like you said, we now talk about different things, we do different things, we create memories that we actually remember. I think a lot of our kind of like a lot of our previous memories have just been, you know, drinking, and when we look back now, like all our nights just blur into one kind of like boozy night. And people will be like, do you remember that time? And they'll be like, oh, was that when we went to so-and-so? Or was that... No, actually, I think that was there. Whereas, like, now the things that we do are very specific memories. Like, oh, do you remember that time we did this? And do you remember that time we did that? So in that way it has strengthened. But even just like being there as a good friend, being more present, showing up. Like when I say I would go to like a baby shower, I would have one ear listening to the conversation and one ear thinking, are they bringing out Prosecco? Or whereas now I'm like fully there, I'm like fully invested, and I listen, and like I'll wake up in the morning and be like, oh yeah, so-and-so says she's got a doctor's appointment today. I'm going to text her and like tell her good luck. Whereas before I would have been hungover and like wouldn't have remembered, or would have been like so self-absorbed in my own shame. So like those kind of things have only strengthened my friendships.
Yeah. I think that's wicked, because it's like you're emotionally investing more in the friendships rather than just kind of, you know, focusing on such a simple thing. And it's like, you know, we were kind of joking before about, you know, before we hit record, about boys playing PlayStation in the evening and kind of, you know, having that, you know, just playtime, right? But it's like, it's kind of developed my friendship a little bit with my friends, because it's not just so much, oh, let's go out and let's have drinks and let's, you know, get battered and, you know, stop off at the kebab shop on the way home or whatever. It's actually, within it, we're still having conversations like, oh, how's your day? Like one of my friends has just recently had a baby. Another one of my friends is, his girlfriend's like wife, should I say, is heavily pregnant. So we're like, oh, how's the missus? You know, how are the kids? And you're actually having like a bit of meaningful conversation with it. And I feel like when you invest more emotionally through not being distracted by this thing of like drinking and the culture that it brings with it and partying and all that sort of stuff. Yes, we miss hanging out with each other, don't get me wrong, but like we're still having that connection in a different way. And I've sensed like a bit of a shift around the way that we show up for each other as friends as well, right? And one of the other things that I found really interesting in the book is like the way that you kind of explain yourself opening up emotionally. And there's a moment where you talk about having like a breakdown in your office, and you realize that you'd kind of, you know, through, you know, stop drinking and quitting drinking, you've kind of opened yourself up to sort of experiencing all these emotions that you know, previously suppressed. Like, can you talk a little bit about like how that's been? Because I know from personal experience, that's a wild experience when you start to all of a sudden like open your arms to these emotions that you tried to push away for all these years.
Yeah, definitely. Also, though, going back to like what you said about like with the boys on the PlayStation and stuff, I think that is the thing, is that ironically, you know, alcohol is meant to be this great connector. But, you know, if you listen to two drunk people having a conversation, they're not listening to each other. They're just talking at each other. Whereas when you take alcohol out of the conversation, you do actually make those really, like, deep things. And like you said, there's a bit of a shift. And that might be because, you know, you're not all boozing. You're actually, like, listening and engaged. And I would definitely agree with you on that. And then, yeah, in terms of the emotions, it was just, I think every emotion that I'd ever had, I'd kind of like, well, negative emotions anyway, I'd just suppress down, really. So, you know, if I went out on a Friday night and I was feeling stressed, I would drink. Or if I was feeling insecure and be like, I don't like my outfit, I just like drunk. And it was just like every single emotion that was negative, you know, when I went through heartbreak, I drank through it. It was my coping mechanism. I didn't have a healthier coping mechanism. That was it. And because of that, when I suddenly had all these emotions and was like, okay, I actually don't know what to deal with them, my body went into this like weird shutdown mode. It was like extreme anxiety. I was getting panic attacks, and it was just all of a sudden I had all these emotions that I just didn't know what to do with them. Which sounds really weird. So that's like one of the big parts of the journey has been like finding healthier coping mechanisms, finding ways that I can unwind, sitting with my feelings, like all that stuff that I never did, because as soon as I was remotely stressed, I'd be like, well, sod it, I need a glass of wine. Like that would be it.
Yeah. Why do you think we do that? Why do we sort of hide our emotions with alcohol?
It's just so ingrained, but even positive emotions, this is the ironic thing as well, we celebrate with the same thing that we commiserate with. So like we even take the edge off the nice emotions as well, you know, like if you're really excited and you're like, oh, this is great, but then you're like, oh, I'm going to grab a drink. Like when we have a celebration, or say someone gets like a job promotion and you're so excited and you're really happy about it, we grab alcohol, and it's like, well, alcohol will actually numb that feeling a little bit. So don't you want to experience like 100% of that joy? So I just don't even think we think about it rationally. I think it is just so ingrained in our culture to grab alcohol, whether it's celebrate, commiserate, anything. I just think that that's what we're trained to do. And of course, like, social media doesn't help. TV shows that perpetuate the narrative don't help either. It's just so ingrained that that's what we do. Like, happy or sad, booze is there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, even like from my own journey, like I mentioned before, like when I was younger, when I wasn't feeling great and I was like feeling overwhelmed, I'd just want to go out and drink on the weekend. But I found as I got older, that I don't really drink that much anyway. Like, I never really have. Like, I still don't drink a lot. Like, even if I go out with my mates, I'm more than happy to have like one or two. I don't need feel the need to like get that drunk. But one of the things that I really noticed is like when you open the door up to the emotions, like you said, not just the bad, like the good as well. It's like through my journey of like going through depression and then suffering with like really bad anxiety, what I've noticed is like we're scared to actually feel the emotions that we don't like to feel. And because of that, we shut off all the emotions, like you said. So one of the things that I noticed was that I felt numb to feeling what actual real joy was. Like, I'd experienced like these little moments of like, the dopamine hit and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't know what real joy was. And equally, I didn't know how to express like anger or sadness. It was just like this flat line of just like a numbness, like we've said, right? And what I've noticed is that when you do actually lean into the emotion and almost welcome it, your relationship with that emotion changes. Yes, it becomes more difficult when you're feeling sad or feeling angry, but actually you can go, you know what? I'm okay with feeling this right now. Like, I don't feel that I have to push it away, because like if you push something away, like if I was to push you now somehow through the screen, but if I was to push you now, your instant reaction would be to push me back, right? And the same is going to happen with an emotion or a feeling. If you push it away, it's going to push back at you. And it's like, if you can actually welcome that emotion and be okay with it, all of a sudden you're like, actually, this isn't so bad. Like, this is just part of our human experience, right? And that goes for the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Oh, I completely agree. And I also think if you don't have the bad as well, then the good isn't as good, if that makes sense. So like, I always think when I'm embracing sad, I'm like, this is great, because when I start feeling happy again, I'm going to feel so happy.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, it's just this, it's like I always like try to think of it. It's like, you see like a heartbeat, right? It's like, if the heartbeat's flat, it's like you're not alive, you're dead, right? And it's the same with your emotions. If you're not experiencing the high emotions as well as the low emotions, then your experience of living is a dead one. It's just a flat one. It's a, I was going to say boring, but for want of a better word, like it's I can't think of a better word now. It's just
monotonous.
Monotonous. There we go. That's a fantastic. Yes, it's a monotonous experience, and it's like that's not what we want, right? And then the reason we go out and we party and we want to kind of experience these highs is because we want to express, the feeling that we can't feel because we're pushing it away. It's fascinating, really.
Yeah, I think that's what you realise as well, that we just see it as, it's alcohol, you take it out of the equation, but actually there's like a whole thing behind it to do with emotions and feelings. And that was what I kind of realised, is that it wasn't just actually I was going to stop drinking. It was like, okay, I was going to learn how to feel my own emotions, which is like a very unique experience. So I think like it's just another technique that is so underrated for actually, learning to be more emotionally healthy. And that's one of the things that I said. That's why I think it has been so good for my mental health, because I haven't learned to like fear my emotions anymore. I don't push them away. I sit with them. Sometimes I will just bawl because I think it's also good to like express them. So if I feel like I'm going to cry, I'm like, that's it. I'm just going to cry. I'm not going to push it down. I'm just going to wail. It's going to be fine. Then once it's out, you're like, this is great. So I think it is just like another tool as well as to how you can feel your emotions and be more mentally healthy.
Yeah, for sure. And have you got any other tips for, feeling your emotions and being mentally healthy?
Yeah, I think like expressing them as well, and whether that's like through physical exercise. I love dancing, so I will literally just dance around the house, like just to like get it out, because I think physically sometimes you just have to like shake it out. I do try and meditate. I'm not the best meditator because I am a fidgeter, but I do try it, and that's the point of it. So that's one thing as well. But yeah, just like not being afraid to actually feel them, to cry if you need to wail down the phone if you need to, and to talk about it as well. Sometimes if it's in your head, it just festers. So if you tell someone, like I always say, like a problem shared is a problem halved. I'm a big advocate of that. And if you don't have someone to tell, for me, writing is an awesome medium. So I will just get it out. Like lots of people journal, but mine's just kind of more of a brain dump, I think. I don't have like a set day that I do it on. It's just if it builds up, I'm like, right, get it onto paper. So I would say those things as well are like really good just to get it out of your head. But just sitting with it and like to actually just sit down and just think about it. And sometimes you can just like let it run its course as well. Like you think the emotion, think it through, and then you're like, oh, okay, I've thought about that now, done. But yeah, it is a hard task. It's something that I still work on daily.
Yeah. I think we all do. But that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Is the more you kind of work on it and the more you meditate and journal and dance around, the more you're actually understanding yourself. You know, like, so earlier today I was feeling really like anxious about something. I don't know what. I just there was just something there, and I had my lunch and I was still feeling it, and I was like, I got to do this interview with Millie at 3. I was like, I need to get out of my head in some way. And although I didn't do any of the things that you said, what I did do is I just sat down on the sofa and I just put a podcast on, and I just sat and listened to the podcast. And it's almost like by expressing, and I know I wasn't literally expressing what I was feeling, but what I was doing was I was getting myself out of my head and into something else. And instead of it being like a distraction piece, like, you know, like partying or drinking or, you know, all of these other things that we hear about, like these escapisms, it was more of me just like wanting to focus my brain's energy into something that was, you know, not necessarily productive, but was like of benefit for me. And it's really interesting because the interview that happened to click on, so random, was they were talking about podcasting and like getting prepared for a podcast, which was weird because that's what I was almost trying to do by listening to the podcast in a way. And it's like sometimes I feel like you just have to take yourself out of the mind that you're in and put that energy into something else. And, you know, people who listen to the podcast often will know I'm a big advocate of meditation for that. You know, just having that space for yourself and to be the person who observes your thoughts rather than like be the one who's getting involved in them.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to hear like what your struggles have been with meditation.
I'm just a bit of a fidgeter. It's actually the like physicalness of it, just like staying still for a time. But I do try. I try and do like bedtime hypnotherapy meditation because I find that easier to go like on my way out rather than like on my way in. But I think it's interesting what you say about like escapism as well, because I think when I first started and I started learning about, you know, like fully like not trying to push your emotions away, I kind of then demonized all escapism as like totally bad. And then I think what I realized is, you know, I'm not perfect. Everyone does need that bit of escapism, but there's something that is so much healthier as an escape method than alcohol, because alcohol does do physical damage to you. Like, it's a fact, we all know that. Whereas reading a book isn't physically damaging, but is still like a fantastic method of escapism. So if you are trying to avoid your feelings and you physically can't sit with them, I'd say like there's definitely healthier forms of escapism than drinking. So I think that's one thing that I like try and think about, because I started being like, no, I'm not going to read a book because that's, you know, just ignoring my feelings. So I think those things. But yeah, meditation, I think it is the physical, just like sitting down. Even like now I'm like fiddling and touching things, so I need to just like calm.
Yeah, I think as well, like I used to be like that. I found it really hard at first to meditate, and not physically, like, and I think everyone who starts, you know, meditation from scratch, you have there's a struggle, right? Because we're not used to just sitting down and like being with our thoughts. You know, we almost like go through our to-do list in our head and like, oh, when I've done, I've got to do this, and then I've got to do that, and there's this thing later, and I've got to do this stuff tomorrow, and there's cooking to be, and all this, and you're just sort of going through this to-do list, but you're not fully meditating in a way, because when you're fully meditating, you're kind of just actually allowing your thoughts to pop up and go. And so I was actually writing something the other day, like, I don't know if it's just me, but it's like I used to think that I can literally control every thought in my head and like what happens and when. But it's like the more I've meditated, the more I realize that you can't. And a brilliant example is like when I'm in the shower, it's like, and the shower is a really great example because you have no other stimulus. You don't have a phone. You might play some music, but you don't have anything else to distract you or, create an input into your brain. The most random things come into my head. Like I could be thinking about like what I had for dinner last Thursday, or like, what that old boss said to me like 10 years ago, to like the book that I read last year, to like an ex from like 7 years. And it's just like all this random stuff. And it's like when you realize actually you can't control what thoughts your mind's going to generate, you then start to understand like when you meditate, that's all your mind is doing is just generating thoughts, and all you have to do is just observe them and be like, oh, actually that's a weird thought, okay, and then bring yourself back into the focus on the breath, or whatever the focus of that particular meditation is. And it actually becomes quite enjoyable because then you finish the session, you're like, oh my god, there was so much random stuff just bouncing around my head right then. It's crazy.
It's so funny you say the shower, actually, because I am obsessed with baths, and I always say like baths were one of the things that kept me sober, because again, that was one of my, like, I would just go lay in the bath for like half hour, no distractions, no book, no nothing, and just lay there and like learn to be with my thoughts. So that was an easy thing that I did as well. I love a bath. The place I'm living in at the moment only has a shower, and I'm really not getting used to it because I like the laying down aspect of a bath. But that is one of the places that I would learn to sit with my feelings, was just in the bath, no distractions, just chilled, listen to my thoughts, watch them come, watch them go, and not try and change them.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And one of the things that kind of really jumped out to me was, it was kind of a bit of a throwaway line, but I think it's quite an important point in the book. Is like there's a part where you say that think about all of the money that you're spending on alcohol and partying, but instead like invest that money on yourself. And I was like, wow, that's like, I've never really thought about it like that. It's like, if you totaled it up, it's probably hundreds, for some people probably thousands a month, right? And it's like, actually, you could be using that money for something that's going to far more benefit you personally, and, help you evolve as a person. And like, even if it's like trying something new. So like, what were some of the things that you started to do with this newfound, not just, money that you've saved, but like the time as well that you've saved in not always going out and not always drinking and not always going for a drink after work and everything like that?
Yeah, I started, the first thing I did was go travelling. So I did like more extravagant holidays, because all my holidays before had been, like I'd been to Ibiza 4 times. And it was always, I would go on a holiday, but I would come back grayer than I was before I went. Like I was that person who came back and was like, I need a holiday to recover from my holiday. So I actually started like travelling and doing more nice holidays and adventure holidays. I started doing like really random things to like broaden my horizons, and I started buying loads of self-help books, and I started going to like inspirational talks and all those things, because it is true that when you drink, the only person who really benefits are the company is selling the alcohol. And if you're like sad and you're using that, it's not going to improve you. There's no way that alcohol is ever going to make you less anxious, less depressed. It's just like chemically, it doesn't do that for you. So there's a million other things that you could be spending your money on that are actually going to improve those situations. I went to therapy for 3 months, and I probably wouldn't have been able to afford that if I was still drinking. So that's like really counterproductive, because I was using drinking to like feel less anxious, but it was making me more anxious. Once you take that out of the equation, you go to therapy, and then you're like, oh, okay, I feel slightly calmer now. This is great. So like things like that I did as well. And just, everyone says, oh, you save so much money. I didn't really save that much money because I spent it, but I spent it on things that really benefited me at the time. So those are a few things that I did. And then just, it's really hard because I don't like to be like, oh, well, as soon as you stop drinking, you're going to become super productive, you're going to start a business, you're going to do this, because it doesn't always happen that way. But just naturally, I am more productive. I have more hours in the day. I wake up, I'm not hungover. Like, I have more even like luxury lay-ins that I don't feel guilty about, because I think, well, I would have been hungover during this time. And I just have more time to rest. So like on a Sunday before, I would have been so hungover. I probably would have felt a bit better about 4, watched a bit of TV, eaten some food, probably gone to bed to make sure that I was okay for work on Monday. Whereas now I've got this like lovely Sunday that I can chill and go for a walk and then try meditation, read a book. Like, I just feel like I've got so much time that has helped benefit me. And it's not necessarily, oh, I'm super productive now, I do X, Y, Z, but I've just got more time for me, for self-care, for enjoying life.
Love that. What are some of the things you do then for self-care?
I mean, baths are like probably number one self-care, but exercise, I love quite slow exercise. So I love yoga, and just even if it's just like a good old stretch, Pilates, anything like that. But getting out in nature, I absolutely love. I really like water-based exercise as well. So like paddle boarding, I love. But unfortunately, most of the lakes are closed at the moment. Anything like kayaking, I'm obsessed with. So that's exercise. Enjoyable exercise for me is self-care. I'm not a runner. I don't really enjoy running. It does, and that's the thing as well. I started doing when I stopped drinking, was stop doing like punishing forms of exercise, or exercise that felt punishing to me, and just started being like, okay, well, what exercise do I like? What exercise makes me happy? What exercise do I look forward to? And just started doing things like that instead. Whereas before I was like, I'm going to drink like 20 Jaeger bombs, wake up, and then the next day I'm going to try and go to the gym and run however fast, because I feel like I need to burn off all the Jaeger bombs and sweat out the hangover. So then I started being like, okay, well, I'm going to take exercise a bit more mindfully, and actually it just gave me like space to explore different things. So that's a really good self-care thing. And then just like connecting with my friends, I think so much of our connection is based around alcohol that it kind of doesn't really become self-care anymore. But now if I like meet up with friends and we just have like a really nice like brunch, or we just chat and we connect, that for me is self-care as well.
Yeah, I love what you said about mindful like exercise, because for me, one of the things I really noticed during lockdown is that how much I missed going to the gym. And it's not necessarily the act of exercising, because I've done the home workouts. I do like a yoga stretch like pretty much every morning. You've got like a little workout ball that like I use. I've got there's all sorts of stuff behind me that you can't see, but like foam rollers and like there's all sorts, right? But it's like it's actually the taking the time to go, I'm gonna go to this place, and this time is just for me. It's just for me. Like, I'm not going there because I want to have like, washboard abs or like massive biceps, but I'm going there because I know that it serves me. It keeps my body healthy, and it keeps my mind healthy, which then keeps me emotionally healthy. And it's like that approach to like exercise being something that's mindful and not just like, grinding your body until it's shattered, which is what we can, fall into with like, too much high intensity stuff like running and spin classes, and it's all quite intense, right? But it's like, actually, if you can take a mindful approach to exercise, it serves you so much more powerfully. Like I would never even now step foot into a gym and just start trying to smash loads of heavy weights. A, because I can't, but B, because I don't particularly enjoy it. And it's like, if I'm not going to enjoy it, then I don't want to do it. Yes, I can still push myself within my limits, but I still find that enjoyable. But just punishing yourself because you want to burn off, the drinks that you've had, or you want to, get your stress out or your anger out, is not serving you. Like, what is serving you is like doing something mindfully and understanding why you're doing it and why you enjoy it and why it's good for you. Because then you can start to build up that awareness of like the person that you are, rather than just always, it goes back to what we said before, like pushing stuff away.
Yeah, 100%. I think just like in all areas of my life, I've become that more mindful. Whereas like, before I was on this like go big, go hard all the time mentality. I was going out, getting steaming drunk, waking up the next day, being hungover, and then being like, oh, well, I need to make up for lost time now. So I'm going to go and I'm going to run really quickly and I'm going to do this. Whereas now everything, like, I just feel like I can have more like breathing space and more time to be like, hey, what makes me happy? What exercise do I want to do? What self-care do I want to do? Like, it's just more space, and my life doesn't feel like it's constantly like full throttle, which I absolutely love.
Yeah. And have these things kind of opened you up then to being a bit more spiritual as well? Because I know in the book you mention it, and that, you know, you talk about, you know, AA sessions, they have quite a spiritual base, not necessarily religious, but like a spiritual, but, you know, letting go, a believing in something beyond. Like, has this journey kind of opened you up to that as well?
Yeah, I think just generally I'm so much more open-minded. Again, because before I didn't have any space to think or appreciate other ideas. I was so close-minded because I was just like, drink, hungover, wake up, feel better, drink. Like, I didn't have any breathing space, and I didn't have time to understand other people's attitudes, and I was quite selfish, I think, as well. Whereas, and especially changing your whole belief system on one thing. So everything I believed about alcohol, I now don't believe. So when you're suddenly like, oh, actually, you can believe one thing, and then all of a sudden you can completely change your opinion about it, has made me kind of like more tolerant to other people and other people's attitudes, and more open-minded of like, well, actually, 3 years ago, I believed something completely different to what I believe now. So this person might be right about this thing. So I'm willing to listen and understand their point of view, because actually I might be wrong, because I was wrong about alcohol. So it's kind of just made me more aware, more open-minded, and I used to be very like jaded and cynical, and now I'm a bit more, well, I'm a lot more actually. Like, when I stopped drinking, I've got one friend who's very spiritual, and she was like, let's go to Reiki. And I was like, okay, do you know what? I'm going to open myself up to it and let's see how it goes. And I loved it, and I really enjoyed it. Whereas when I was drinking, I would have been like, I'm not doing Reiki. That sounds like ridiculous. So now I think I'm just more aware and more open-minded. And then actually, when you read into kind of like alcohol and spirituality, you actually find out that there is quite a bit of a link. So they say that actually alcohol kind of like pokes holes in your aura, and you're not attuned to the energy of things. And it is quite true, you know, like if you are drunk in a pub and someone's looking at you, you probably won't feel the vibe. But when you're sober, it is really weird. Like, I can tell when someone's like looking at me, or if my boyfriend's looking at me from the corner of his eye, I'm like, what? Why are you looking at me? I can see it. And it is kind of more like you are a bit more attuned to like the energy of the world. So yeah, it is an interesting one, and I've definitely become more open-minded, I would say.
Yeah, which I think is great, because I think there's a lot of space for learning when you do become open-minded. And it's not, you know, it's not to say that, you know, if you stop drinking, or you drink less, that you're gonna go around like walking around barefoot and grow your hair and become like this ultimate yogi who only eats plants and, you know, hugs trees and stuff. Which, you know, don't get me wrong, I'd love to live that life in many ways. I think you open yourself up to learning and new experiences, like you said with the Reiki, right? That's something that is very spiritual, because it's all about cleansing the energy of the body and understanding the 7 energy centers, and, you know, where you're holding blocks, and where the energy flows more through you than other parts, right? And it's like, when you start to educate yourself, and it comes back to that point of self-love and self-care, you're just building up more of a picture of who you are. And it's like, you're seeing that little newborn baby that you kind of felt you were. Like, you're seeing that newborn baby grow into like this human being that you're probably, you know, in many ways meant to be, rather than like the human being that you're told that you should be, kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. That is what you realise as well. You're like, I've just been doing this the whole time because everyone else was, and that's what I thought I should be doing. And actually, is this what I wanted to be doing? Like, is that the person that I wanted to be? No, it's not. Like, this is the person that I want to be. So you just become more open-minded and more like, yeah, you learn things about yourself, I think.
And has it made you more reflective then, like being more open to stuff, in terms of like, you know, I saw something on your Instagram, I think it was a couple of days ago now, where your friends, you know, made these, I think it's a candle holder, and you're talking about like space and the universe, and like reflecting on the fact that we're basically just dust floating through space. Like, has that played an element into like, you know, how you're now experiencing yourself and the world around you?
Yeah, and it's just given me time to like explore things that I had an interest in but never had time to learn about or actually absorb because I was too hungover pretty much. So I've always loved space. I've loved the idea of space. I used to like it when they had the planetarium come to your school. I would just love that. So then when I stopped drinking, I'd start watching the odd Neil deGrasse Tyson thing, and I just became more interested. And I'm not claiming to be a space expert in any way, but all the things that I always used to I actually started doing again. And things that made me happy, I always say, before I stopped drinking. When I look at space, I find it fascinating. And I always, if I'm feeling really anxious, I'll put up on YouTube NASA videos of space, and I will just lay there in the dark and just watch them. And because it makes me feel really small and really why am I worried about these things? Because there's an entire universe out there that we don't even know. And so I started doing things like that, and I just started learning about things that I like doing and that interest me, and things I loved as a kid, like dancing. I talk about it in the book. I was a competitive dancer until I was 18. In 2010, I was on Britain's Got Talent before I got beaten by a dog, wow. Which is a very interesting story.
Touchy subject.
Don't talk about it. And then I went to uni, and I stopped dancing really because I just cared about drinking. So then, when I left uni and I stopped drinking, then I started dancing a bit more, and that's something that I still do now. So I've got back into hobbies and things that I liked doing as a kid. I like going bowling. I like going to the arcade. I like doing all those things that made me happy before all of a sudden my default for happiness had become drinking. So whether that was space, whether that is, going to a kid's birthday and eating loads of cake, I have embraced my inner child, and it's just given me more wonder for life, I think, as well. Before I was so clouded and so I just want a drink in my hand, or I'm hungover. It was one or two. I was so fogged out really to the world at all points, whereas now it's that has been lifted, and the world is in HD and everything is wondrous. And I'm making it sound like every single day I wake up and I'm oh my god, life is amazing. It's not like that, but I just have that more childlike wonder. At Christmas, I like driving around and looking at the Christmas lights and feeling that magic of Christmas, which for me kind of got overtaken with a jumper that said Prosecco ho ho ho, and always having the latest gin in my hand that had snow globe sparkles in it. That kind of encroached on all those things that I loved as a kid that were joyful and magical, and that's how I feel about space. And I think those are the types of things that got blurred over with alcohol. So now everything is quite wonderful, I think.
Yeah, and I like that the picture you painted of everything's now in HD. It's it makes me think of what's the film where it starts off in black and white and then slowly it becomes color as they kind of I can't remember what the film's called. Have you ever seen it?
No, I don't think so.
I have to try and remember it, and I'll let you know. But it's a film that basically it starts off in black and white, and then the main character starts to notice these flashes of color on flowers and stuff, and then by the end of the film, the whole world to her has become colorful instead of black and white. And it's kind of reminds me a bit of that. It's we're so ingrained in the culture and society that we've been brought up in, which is the kind of black and white world. Is this is the only thing that is this culture of working really hard, living for the weekend, partying with your friends, all of this stuff, mundane, water cooler or work kitchen conversations over a cup of tea, all that sort of stuff. And then when you kind of just shift out of that perspective a little bit, you get those dashes of color, which are oh wow, actually I really enjoy this Reiki thing, or wow, these YouTube videos on space are really cool. Or for me, it's I got into skateboarding a couple of years ago. It's I can't believe I never even thought about trying it before. It's this is amazing. Why have I not tried this? It's so fun. And it's reading about different understandings from a psychological or spiritual religious point of view. To me, I find fascinating how other people see the world. And it's when you step out of that black and white and you start to throw in those dashes of color, you're actually just lighting up your life in a different way. And it's the more you can fill in the color part, the more you're experiencing truly how I believe we're supposed to experience life, which is with a sense of wonder and joy, and you said a kind of childlike playfulness. And it's crazy that we get stuck in one part of it for so long before we actually then realize that there's more to life than what we've been doing this whole time. There's so much more, and it's like we should be trying to experience it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's what I say to people about like not drinking. It doesn't have to be, oh, this like rock bottom moment. It can be that actually you just take it out and you get to witness like more joy in the world, more clarity, and you have time for the things you love. It's more of that. I see it as like an obstacle to not complete happiness, but being more content rather than something that you have to wait until it's a problem. It's actually just like another level that you can unlock really and go to the next stage of like, oh, this is great. And I think that's the thing when it is in HD. Although sometimes, you know, the emotions are harder and you do have to like deal with those things, and when you're sad you can't just gloss over it with alcohol, but then the good bits are in HD as well. So when you do feel joy, like that joy is so like pure joy, and it's not just because you've like necked 10 tequilas and you're getting super rowdy. It's like real like innate sense of like lovely content joy. So I think that's like the nice bit, is that everything is in HD, so that can be a problem because your stress, you can't just gloss over it, you have to learn to deal with that. But then the good bits are in HD as well.
Yeah, and I think it just all feeds into like deeper learning, isn't it? It's like if you can actually learn to deal with your stress rather than just, like you said, gloss over it with a few drinks or by, you know, some sort of escapism that isn't going to benefit you, then you're not actually dealing with the stress and you know, processing it properly, right? You're just like pushing it away and like closing it behind the door in a way, right? But it's like if you can learn to kind of open yourself up to those things, like we said before, right? It just deepens your learning, it just deepens your experience, and it's like it's just a different experience of life, really. Like, I don't know, sometimes I just don't know how to put it into words. It's like you just want to express it with like all of this stuff, and you just like, oh, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. So one of the things then, like I kind of want to touch on as well, was this idea of boundaries, because I feel like going through the journey you've been on of being someone who is, you know, a heavy drinker, was the kind of party girl of your group and the one who was getting everyone together to go out, to then, you know, not being that anymore and quitting drinking. Like, how did you go about putting boundaries in place?
Yeah, I found it very hard at first because I felt like I was being really hypocritical, that I, you know, had been the one making everyone do shots, and then all of a sudden I didn't want to drink and I didn't really want to be around drunk people. It was quite ironic. So I think it was something that I've definitely learned, and something that I still learn now. And I've spoken to like a lot of different therapists. I spoke to one for the book about, you know, like what really is a boundary, of like, is it something that we want someone to change for us, or is it something that we really need? So like we kind of talk about the example of if you've got like a partner that drinks but you don't drink, and you have to do like a lot of like boundary negotiation. But also I found like my boundaries changed over time when I got more comfortable with situations. Like I can happily be around drinkers, it doesn't bother me anymore, whereas at the start it felt like, oh, I don't really want to be around these drunk people because they might make me want to drink. So like your boundaries change over time. And it's the same with when I first stopped drinking. I didn't really tell people, I didn't really go into the like the whole story. I just said, you know, like, I'm not drinking right now, I'd appreciate if you like didn't keep asking. Whereas, you know, like 5-6 months later, once I got comfortable with the story, I'd be like, actually, I'm not drinking because it was making me so miserable. Like there were some points where I was really, really low, and I've done 6 months without it, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. So kind of changing your boundaries depending, and I mean, I still even change them now, because if like someone asks me why I don't drink in a really like nice, inquisitive way, I will give them the whole story, because I think they probably are thinking about it if they've asked me in that way. Whereas, you know, if I go to a work drinks, if I'm freelancing in a different office and then I speak to someone and they ask me in a way that kind of insinuates that they think it's a ridiculous idea, then I just can't be bothered to entertain the conversation. So I just say, oh, I just don't drink. And if they're like, why? And I just say, oh, I just don't. So again, like your boundaries can change depending on the situation or the person. So that's one thing I've had to learn as well. You don't necessarily have to have super rigid boundaries, but the boundaries that you do decide to set, you have to keep rigid.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'd like to add on top of that as well, is like the idea that we see boundaries as a negative all the time. Like we hear like, oh, like if you're, you know, having like a conversation with someone who you're dating or who, you know, early on in a relationship, and you're like, you start talking about boundaries, you can see it as a bad thing of like, oh my God, like does this mean like these are things you don't want me to do or times you don't want me to be around? But it's actually you're just learning to, it's like cultivating your own energy in a way. You know, we see it as like a defense mechanism or like protecting yourself, but actually you're learning to get the best out of yourself. That's all it is. And it's like a lot of, you know, people who I know, like my friends, my girlfriend, will know that if you send me a message in the morning, like I'm not going to reply before like 10, because morning is my time. That's like one of my boundaries, is like morning is my time for my exercise, my meditation, you know, etc., etc. And it's like that's a healthy thing for me, because if I'm not doing that, then I'm not going to be the best friend I can be. I'm not going to be the best partner I can be. I'm not going to be the best, you know, podcaster I can be, a coach I can be, a writer or whatever. Like all of these things, it's like that's a boundary I put up for me to get the best out of me. And I think if we can reframe that idea of boundaries to that level of like, actually I'm doing this for me, then it changes it a little bit. It makes it a softer thing to negotiate. It's not like you're just being like, nah, don't do that, you can't do that. It's like, actually this is something I need to do for me.
Yeah, 100%. And some people, especially around drinking, will test those boundaries. And that is, again, I always say, like, I'm really quite radically honest with people now, because if they try and push those, I say, look, I have to do this like for me, because I want to be the best person that I can be. You know, if I do drink, I'm going to be a terrible friend, I'm going to be a terrible daughter, I'm going to be a terrible all of those things. Whereas if you don't push me now, like, this is great for me and it's going to benefit you, because I'm going to show up, I'm going to be present. You know, if you're drinking tonight, I can take you home and make sure you get back safely. Like, I always say it is for me, and it is hard to get that across to people, but I think a lot more people are talking about boundaries now, and I think more people are completely understanding that, which I think is really good.
Yeah, I'm interested there, like those fears you have of like not being the best friend and best, you know, daughter and everything. Did you think that those fears sometimes can hold you back as well?
Do you mean, like, do you think they hold me back now?
Yeah.
I think they hold me accountable to not going back to drinking. I don't necessarily think they're a bad thing, because I still do use some of those like negative things as a reason to carry on, because I think otherwise if I gloss over everything and remember it as a really rosy time, I'd be tempted to go back. Whereas, you know, like I regularly search my WhatsApp for I'm never drinking again and look at some of the like things that I'd sent my friends, and those actually spur me on to be like, yeah, I don't want to go back to doing that. And I get these, which is quite a regular phenomenon for people who stop drinking, I get drinking dreams. So I will have a dream sometimes that I've drunk and I woke up and I'm like really panicked, but I have like reframed them now as like good things, because I wake up and I'm like, that is exactly how I never want to feel again. That like, what did I do last night? Like, what did I say? So I think, yeah, I don't know if they hold me back. I think they hold me accountable and keep me rooted in the path that I know is best for me and stop me being tempted to go back.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of reframing the fears. Like, I think that's super, super powerful. But yeah, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Like I've really enjoyed it, and I feel like I've learned a lot from it. So I want to thank you for the time today, and to kind of sign out, do you want to let people know where they can find you online and keep up to date with everything you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So you can find me on Instagram at Millie Gooch, or if you're sober curious, you can come and look at Sober Girl Society, and the book is available in all good bookstores and Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.